Aristotle was born in 384 BCE in the small town of Stagira in northern Greece, far from the cultural center of Athens. His father, Nicomachus, served as the royal physician to the king of Macedon. This connection meant that from childhood, Aristotle grew up surrounded by medicine, science, and the secrets of nature. Unlike many philosophers who came from aristocratic or political families, Aristotle's roots were practical. His early life was filled with observation of plants, animals, and the human body. This gave him a curiosity not just about abstract ideas, but about the living world. Tragedy struck early. Both of his parents died when he was still young, leaving him an orphan. But instead of being crushed by loss, Aristotle developed resilience. He was placed under the care of a guardian, Proxenus, who recognized his potential and encouraged his education. By the age of 17, Aristotle had already outgrown his small town. With an insatiable hunger for knowledge, he left Stagira and traveled to Athens, the greatest intellectual center of the ancient world. There, at Plato's academy, he would begin the journey that would turn him into the teacher of kings and the father of science. When Aristotle arrived in Athens at just 17 years old, he entered the academy, the school founded by the great philosopher Plato. For the next 20 years, Aristotle would study there, mastering philosophy, mathematics, politics, and science under Plato's watchful eye. Plato quickly saw the brilliance of his student. Aristotle asked questions few dared to ask, and his hunger for truth was relentless. But even as a young man, Aristotle did not simply accept what he was taught. While Plato believed in eternal forms, perfect ideals beyond our world, Aristotle grew skeptical. He wanted knowledge rooted in the physical world, in what could be observed, measured, and explained. Still, the academy shaped him. He learned the power of reason, debate, and logic, sharpening the tools that he would later transform into entirely new sciences. He was Plato's most devoted pupil, yet also his most daring challenger. By the time Plato died, Aristotle had already begun to see himself not just as a student, but as a thinker ready to break away and build a philosophy of his own, one grounded not in abstract perfection, but in the reality of life itself.
After 2 decades at Plato's academy, Aristotle began to distance himself from his teacher's ideas. Plato believed that ultimate truth existed in a higher realm of eternal forms, perfect versions of beauty, justice, and goodness. But to Aristotle, this was too far removed from reality. Aristotle wanted truth that could be tested, seen, and experienced. He believed knowledge began with the senses. Instead of searching for a perfect world beyond, he turned his attention to the world in front of us. Plants, animals, politics, art, ethics, all were worthy of study because they revealed patterns in nature and human life. This rebellion against Plato was not disrespect, but independence. Aristotle once said, "Plato is dear to me, but dearer still is truth." He honored his teacher, but refused to be bound by him. It was here that Aristotle's philosophy took shape, a system that united observation with reason, one that would influence science, politics, and ethics for over 2,000 years.
In 343 BCE, Aristotle was invited by King Philip II of Macedon to tutor his son, a young prince named Alexander. The boy was only 13, restless and ambitious, but under Aristotle's guidance, he would become one of the greatest conquerors in history, Alexander the Great. Aristotle didn't just teach him philosophy, he trained him in ethics, politics, medicine, and the art of leadership. He gave him Homer's Iliad
as a guide to heroism, shaping Alexander's vision of himself as a new Achilles. Their lessons were not confined to books. Aristotle and Alexander walked through the countryside, discussing the natural world, human nature, and the responsibilities of power. Aristotle taught that a ruler must serve the good of his people, not his own ambition. But history shows Alexander carried both lessons and contradictions from his teacher. He admired knowledge, yet pursued endless conquest. Still, Aristotle's influence was undeniable. Through Alexander, Aristotle's philosophy traveled with armies across the known world, carried to lands far beyond Greece. Today, we know Aristotle as one of the greatest philosophers, but what survives is only a fraction of his genius. It's said that Aristotle wrote two kinds of works: polished dialogues for the public and detailed lecture notes for his students. The polished works, the ones meant to inspire and impress, have been completely lost. What we read today are his notes, technical and sometimes difficult, not the vibrant works that once captured the attention of Athens. Ancient writers claimed that Aristotle's dialogues were as beautiful as Plato's, full of wit, drama, and poetic force. Imagine masterpieces equal to the greatest plays and speeches of Greece, vanished without a trace. Some of his lost writings may have been destroyed in wars, others forgotten in private collections. A few were discovered centuries later, badly damaged and pieced together in fragments. This means we may never fully know the scope of Aristotle's thought. The Aristotle we study is only a shadow of the man he was, his living voice lost to history.
After years of teaching and traveling, Aristotle returned to Athens and created something revolutionary, the Lyceum. Unlike Plato's academy, which focused on abstract philosophy, Aristotle built his school as a center for all knowledge. Every morning he would walk with his students through shaded pathways, giving lessons as they strolled. That's why they were called the Peripatetics, the walkers. The Lyceum was more than just philosophy. It was a research hub. His students studied animals, plants, politics, poetry, astronomy, and logic. They gathered maps, collected specimens, and recorded data from across Greece and beyond. Some even say the Lyceum was the world's first true university, where knowledge from every discipline was cataloged and analyzed. Aristotle believed that to understand the world, you had to observe it carefully, organize your findings, and then draw conclusions. His school would influence how humans learn for thousands of years, a seed of education that still grows today.
Aristotle wasn't just a philosopher, he was also one of history's first great scientists. At the Lyceum, he devoted enormous energy to the study of living things. He and his students observed animals, dissected specimens, and wrote detailed descriptions of their structures and behaviors. He classified creatures into categories, those with blood and those without, those that lived on land, in water, or in the air. His work on marine biology was especially groundbreaking, describing over 500 species, from fish to octopuses. What's fascinating is that many of his observations, like the development of a chick inside an egg, were so precise that scientists still admire them today. Although some of his theories were later proven wrong, Aristotle's approach, careful observation, recording patterns, and trying to explain them, laid the foundation of biology as a science. For him, life was not chaos. It was a system with order, waiting to be understood.
Aristotle gave humanity one of its most powerful tools, logic. Before him, thinkers often relied on persuasion or rhetoric. Aristotle wanted something more exact, a method to separate truth from opinion. He developed the system of syllogisms, arguments built step by step, where if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true.
For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This may sound simple today, but at the time it was revolutionary. Aristotle's logic became the backbone of philosophy, science, and even law for nearly 2,000 years. Scholars across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond used his logical framework to debate, discover, and teach. It wasn't just about argument. For Aristotle, logic was a way to train the mind to see the structure of reality itself. In his view, reasoning was humanity's greatest strength, the key to knowledge and wisdom.
Aristotle also shaped how people thought about the physical universe. Unlike modern physics, his ideas were based on observation and reasoning, not experiments, but they dominated thought for centuries. He believed everything was made up of 4 basic elements: earth, water, air, and fire, each seeking its natural place. Heavy objects fell because earth and water sought the ground, while fire and air rose upward. Motion, he said, required a constant cause, an idea that wouldn't be challenged until Newton 2,000 years later. Aristotle also thought the universe was divided into 2 realms: the terrestrial world, full of change and decay, and the celestial world, perfect and eternal. The stars and planets, he argued, were embedded in crystal spheres, moving in flawless circles around the Earth. Though much of this was later disproven, his framework gave humanity its first attempt to understand the cosmos systematically. For nearly 2 millennia, his physics shaped how civilizations explained the movements of the heavens and the behavior of matter. Aristotle wasn't only a thinker of nature, he was also a thinker of society. In his work, Politics, he examined how humans live together and why governments exist. He argued that humans are by nature political animals. Unlike other creatures, we form communities not just for survival, but to pursue a good life. The highest form of this community, he said, was the polis, the city-state. Aristotle studied dozens of constitutions from Greek cities to understand what made governments succeed or fail. He classified them into 3 good forms: monarchy, aristocracy, and polity, and their corrupt versions, tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy, when it turned chaotic. What made Aristotle unique was his focus on the middle class. He believed a stable society depended on citizens who were neither too rich nor too poor, a radical idea that still resonates today. For him, politics wasn't just about power, it was about creating the conditions for citizens to live with virtue and purpose.
Aristotle's vision of the good life was laid out in his Nicomachean Ethics, one of his most influential works. Unlike philosophers who sought abstract ideals, Aristotle grounded ethics in everyday life. He argued that the ultimate goal of human existence is eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but better understood as flourishing. This wasn't about fleeting pleasure, but about living in harmony with reason and virtue. Virtue, for Aristotle, meant finding the golden mean, the balance between extremes. Courage lies between recklessness and cowardice. Generosity lies between wastefulness and stinginess. Living ethically wasn't about rigid rules, but about training one's character through practice, until virtue became a habit. Aristotle believed that true happiness came not from wealth, power, or fame, but from cultivating wisdom, friendship, and moral excellence. For him, the good life was about becoming the best version of oneself, not in isolation, but as part of a thriving community.
Aristotle also turned his attention to the art of persuasion. In his work Rhetoric, he analyzed how people convince and move others, not just through logic, but through emotion and character. He identified three pillars of persuasion: logos, the appeal to reason; pathos, the appeal to emotion; and ethos, the credibility and character of the speaker. Together, these formed the foundation of communication that could shape opinion, inspire action, and even guide nations. Unlike the sophists, who often used rhetoric as manipulation, Aristotle saw it as a tool for truth when guided by ethics. He believed that in courts, assemblies, and daily life, the ability to speak well was essential to justice and democracy. His insights still guide politics, law, and public speaking today. From leaders delivering speeches to lawyers in courtrooms and even modern advertising, the strategies Aristotle mapped out more than 2,000 years ago remain central to persuasion.
Aristotle placed enormous importance on education, seeing it as the foundation of a healthy society. For him, knowledge wasn't just about facts. It was about shaping the mind, the body, and the character of citizens. He argued that education should begin early, guided by the state, and should balance physical training, moral instruction, and intellectual growth. Music, poetry, and the arts were as important as mathematics and philosophy because they cultivated harmony within the soul. At his school, the Lyceum, Aristotle created something like the world's first research university. Students didn't just listen to lectures. They collected data, observed nature, debated politics, and studied every branch of knowledge. The school became a living laboratory of human thought. For Aristotle, the purpose of education wasn't simply to produce workers or rulers. It was to form virtuous citizens, capable of reason, justice, and living well within the community. In his vision, education was the very heartbeat of civilization.
Aristotle also explored the power of art in shaping human experience. In his Poetics, he studied drama, poetry, and storytelling, not as entertainment alone, but as a window into the human soul. He argued that tragedy, the highest form of art, moved audiences through catharsis, a purging of emotions like pity and fear. By watching the struggles of characters on stage, people could confront deep truths about life, suffering, and morality. Aristotle also analyzed the structure of stories. He showed how every great play needed a beginning, middle, and end, with a clear plot that guided the audience through conflict and resolution. His insights on narrative remain the blueprint for literature, theater, and even modern cinema. But for Aristotle, art wasn't just imitation. It was a way of revealing universal truths hidden beneath the surface of daily life. Through poetry and drama, humanity could explore what it meant to live, to suffer, and to seek meaning.
Aristotle called metaphysics the study of being as being, the deepest search into what reality truly is. He asked, what does it mean for something to exist? What lies behind the changing world we see? He proposed that everything in nature has both matter, what it is made of, and form, the structure or essence that makes it what it is. A statue, for example, is bronze shaped into a human form. Without matter, it would not exist. Without form, it would not be recognizable. Aristotle also introduced the idea of potentiality and actuality. A seed is potentially a tree. When it grows, it becomes its actuality. For him, all of reality was a process of moving from potential to fulfillment. At the highest level, Aristotle spoke of a prime mover, a perfect, eternal reality that caused all motion in the universe without itself moving. Not a personal God, but a principle of pure thought and pure existence. Through metaphysics, Aristotle tried to uncover the very framework of existence, the invisible order behind everything that is.
Aristotle turned his gaze to the heavens, seeking to understand the structure of the cosmos. In his model, Earth stood unmoving at the center, while the moon, sun, planets, and stars revolved around it in perfect circles. He believed the universe was divided into two regions: the sublunar world, where everything was imperfect and subject to change, and the celestial world, where objects were made of a fifth element, the aether, and moved in eternal perfection. For Aristotle, the stars weren't just lights, but eternal beings, living intelligences moving in harmony. The movements of the heavens reflected order, not chaos. Although later astronomy proved much of this wrong, Aristotle's vision dominated human thought for nearly 2,000 years. His geocentric universe became the foundation for Ptolemy's system, guiding medieval scholars, church doctrine, and even navigation across oceans. His mistake reminds us of something crucial. Science is a journey. Aristotle gave humanity its first great cosmic map, even if later generations had to redraw it.
Aristotle was not only a philosopher, he was also a pioneer of zoology. He spent years studying animals, both in the wild and through dissections, carefully recording their anatomy, behavior, and development. He described more than 500 species, from insects and birds to fish and mammals. He noticed how dolphins breathed air like humans, how octopuses used their tentacles, and how bees organized their hives. His accounts of marine life were so precise that modern biologists still admire them. Aristotle believed every living thing had a purpose, a role in the natural order. He arranged animals into groups based on similarities, laying the groundwork for biological classification long before Darwin or Linnaeus. Although not all of his conclusions were correct, his method, observing, comparing, and seeking patterns, was revolutionary. In many ways, Aristotle was the first true natural scientist, capturing the wonder and diversity of life in an age when nature was still a mystery.
Long before psychology became a science, Aristotle was already asking questions about the mind and soul. In his work De Anima, On the Soul, he explored what it means to be alive and conscious. He saw the soul not as something separate from the body, but as its form, the organizing principle that gives life. Plants had souls that allowed them to grow. Animals had souls that gave them sensation and movement. Humans, however, possessed the highest soul, capable of reason. Aristotle also studied memory, imagination, and dreams, treating them as natural processes rather than mystical events. He believed that the mind began as a blank slate, shaped by experience, a view that would echo centuries later in modern psychology. Though his theories were not always accurate, Aristotle's attempt to link biology with thought and behavior was groundbreaking. He opened the door to the study of human consciousness, making him not just a philosopher, but an early psychologist.
For Aristotle, friendship was not just a personal bond, it was one of the foundations of a good life. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he wrote more about friendship than almost any other philosopher. He described three kinds of friendship: those based on utility, where people are connected for mutual benefit; those based on pleasure, where companionship brings enjoyment; and the highest form, friendships of virtue, where two people value each other for who they truly are. Aristotle believed that such deep friendships were rare, but when they existed, they became mirrors of the soul. Through a true friend, one could see oneself more clearly, share in the pursuit of virtue, and walk together toward a flourishing life. He even argued that no one could be fully happy without friends. Wealth, honor, and wisdom might enrich life, but friendship gave it warmth, meaning, and humanity. For Aristotle, to live well was also to live with others in bonds of trust and love.
Aristotle's influence did not end with his death. His writings became the foundation of Western thought for more than 2,000 years. From science and logic to politics, ethics, and art, his ideas shaped the very way humans sought knowledge. In the Middle Ages, his works were preserved and expanded by Islamic scholars like Averroes and Avicenna before being reintroduced to Europe. Universities across the continent built their curricula around his teachings, calling him simply the philosopher. Even when later thinkers like Galileo, Newton, and Darwin overturned parts of his science, they still worked within the framework he created, asking systematic questions, searching for causes, and building knowledge step by step. Today, Aristotle's legacy lives on in every discipline that values observation, logic, and the pursuit of truth. Though centuries have passed, his vision of knowledge as a path toward human flourishing continues to guide us. Aristotle was not just a man of his time. He was a builder of intellectual foundations, a thinker whose echoes still shape the world we live in.
Aristotle left behind not just systems of thought, but words that continue to inspire across centuries. He reminded us of the power of perseverance. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. He taught us the balance of life. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. On courage, he said, "Courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees the others." On friendship, a friend to all is a friend to none. On learning, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Aristotle's words reach across time because they speak not only to reason, but to the human condition, to our fears, our struggles, and our hopes for a better life. In his wisdom, we hear a call that true greatness is not found in power or wealth, but in the daily practice of virtue, the pursuit of knowledge, and the building of a life worth remembering.